Welcome, comrades. You're listening to The Party Line, a podcast from The Ditch. News and comment from Ireland on theditch.com. I'm Harry Browne.
And I'm Niamh, Bhriain. You can follow The Party Line wherever you watch or listen to podcasts, and follow The Ditch on all your apps. You can like and subscribe and give us 5 stars wherever you can.
And we're joined by Eoghan McNeill from The Ditch. How are you, Eoghan?
Not so bad. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you back.
And we're also joined in studio by a very special guest, a writer, creator, actor, comedian, activist, flotiller, Tadhg Hickey.
Thanks, guys.
Welcome, Tadhg.
What a lovely intro.
So we're going to talk to Tadhg about, the latest happenings to do with Gaza and the flotilla there, and also to do with censorship and big tech. And we'll also be talking about mixing art and activism in a digital world. So thanks a million, Tadhg.
Great to have you, Tadhg. Thanks so much for coming in.
Pleasure, guys. Honour.
But Tadhg, you're going to have to be put on hold for just a minute or two, because it has been a mad week over in the ditch. It was like a kind of a baller mic drop type thing. Like, you're just like, we're defying a British High Court order, and then we're going away for the bank holiday weekend, right? That was the way the ditch played
Out
it.
of office on,
Yeah.
We defied a British High Court order last week for, we reported on Rajiv Menon, who is a barrister who was representing one of the Filton 24. He was attempting to fight a contempt of court charge against him over his very successful representation of one of the Palestine Action activists when they were carrying out their action against Elbit Systems over in Britain.
So this was in relation to the Filton 24 case directly, right?
Yeah.
Right, which is as people will be familiar, this Palestine Action.
Yeah, and among the co-defendants on that case is a guy called Jordan Devlin. We previously reported on the conditions he was facing in prison. Inhumane would be the short way of putting it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And Rajiv Menon, bit of a superstar human rights barrister, knows his stuff, etc., and apparently his closing speech in his representation of Charlotte Head, it was one for the ages apparently, and compared their actions to the suffragettes. From what I've read about this closing speech, he very much politicised their actions. It's something that we see in Ireland. If you go to court appearances for anyone who's carried out alleged actions on US Army planes in Shannon Airport, there is this attempt by the Irish state to depoliticise their actions and to make them out as just yobs or thugs or whatever else. And similar over in Britain with Palestine Action, and Rajiv Menon's speech, it kept bringing the scope back to genocide and Israel and what the role of this weapons maker in all of that. And he was warned about contempt of court charges while he was doing this, and he continued anyway. And Charlotte Head, in the end, had to, I think the word that she gave was, because of decisions taken by the court, she had to finish up representing herself, basically.
Right, and there's usually more latitude given to a defendant than there would be to a barrister to say what they want in their own defense. But essentially what you're suggesting is that the speech was suppressed by the judge because it was politicizing the action, and then that suppression itself was suppressed as well.
Yeah, and there was 2 judges, Lord Justice Bean and Lord Justice Addis. A couple of court orders between them. It was the effect of these court orders was to forbid media reporting on Rajiv Menon's appearance at the Court of Appeal and his fight against these contempt of court charges. And we got the order and we just said, fuck it, like let's go. And it was cool to see. Off the top of my head, there were people like Andrew Feinstein, Kit Clarenberg shared the story, which we did include, just so, more than anything, just so people reading the story would if I know it's a small thing, but if they wanted to share the story, just that they were doing it in the knowledge that this could be breaking the law under British law. So there were a couple of good Brits who were sharing it and all those things.
It was a widely shared story.
Yeah,
I think.
yeah.
The whole Palestine Action thing, I think, has driven people to feel like, hey, I can make this gesture that the state in Britain has declared to be illegal, and to hell with that. You know, it's quite interesting. You know, that just I support Palestine Action. That thing that the likes of Sally Rooney has said that by saying that I've put myself at risk of arrest. But,
This is just a question as opposed to a comment, but like, where does the proscription into terrorism fit into that whole landscape? Because here we don't have the kind of terrorist proscription hanging over the so-called yobs who take action. So you depoliticize here by saying, these are thugs or whatever phrase kind of, the Simon Harris of the day wants to use for them. But in Britain, what is the relationship between somebody doing a political action and then being described as a terrorist? Because they're not dismissed as just yobs. They've gone to the nth degree and gone the other direction and said, actually, no, they're not just yobs, they're terrorists. So like where,
There's a contradiction there where it's like, okay, so...
Like, are you a
so
yob?
what are
you?
Or are you a secret third thing?
Exactly. That's why Britain is just, oh man, it's just an ever fascinating shit show of a country for me.
Britain's terror laws, even in comparison with the US, where there is a level of, even as repressive as the US increasingly gets, there is still, a level of freedom of expression there.
Yeah.
Like I don't like the term authoritarian because, first of all, having worked for Chinese state media, the first thing.
And you struggle to say it.
Yeah. So, I do think it kind of doesn't really mean anything, authoritarian, right?
Yeah.
That said, I am going to use it here now. That Britain, as far as I can see, as authoritarian, as repressive as it gets across the enlightened West.
Yeah. My thing on that is let's be consistent. So if this is authoritarian, if Iran is authoritarian, Britain is definitely authoritarian in the way in which it represses the public and your access to media and your access, if they're all, I'm okay with the term regime, but we're all regimes then. You know what I mean? So...
And there's been this attempt to criminalize various kind of forms of action and speech in Britain. Sorry.
Maybe just to mention on Ireland, there's a number of cases going before the courts in Ennis this month. So
That's right,
a number of people who've gone onto the runway in Shannon will have they're brought back before the courts every few months to kind of review their bail or kind of to keep bringing them back before the courts to then have the case delayed again and again. But there's a case today, there's another one tomorrow, and I think there's some more next week, and they're just kind of these standard hearings that they have. They're not actually trials. And then also to mention that Tadhg O'Corran, he went onto the runway and got onto a plane a few weeks ago. He was held for over 2 weeks in prison before he was released on bail. I went out to the courthouse in Cloverhill because his hearing actually went before the High Court. Usually they're heard in Ennis at district court level. But his went before the High Court, presumably because he was accused of criminal damage that went beyond just getting onto the runway, that he had done allegedly criminal damage to the plane that was of a certain amount that pushed him into the threshold where they took him before the High Court for his bail hearing. But I suppose it's just one to watch because they might try and make an example of him and make him the one that then everyone thinks, okay, well, whereas before you would, get onto the runway, be brought before Ennis Court, and usually you'd be out within 24 to 48 hours or 72 hours. He was over 2 weeks in prison, and I suppose it's just a case to watch now.
Indeed. Yeah.
So
I think it's interesting having this conversation about political status versus terrorist versus thug. I feel like I'm back in the 1980s here as well, and because those are the terms that got kind of spun around again in the media, and that we've had a vast struggle about at that time. And it was quite interesting then, if maybe we turn and look at our non-ditch media item for this week, to see that to some extent the Irish establishment is coming to terms with the fact that Sinn Féin may lead the next government here in the South. But they want them to do it on their terms. And so Owen O'Malley in the Sunday Independent writing about the need for Sinn Féin to look elsewhere besides the left to form the next government. He wants Sinn Féin and Fianna Fáil to coalesce. And he's made this argument that effectively Sinn Féin aren't a left-wing party. Or that Sinn Féin support isn't left-wing anyway, that Eoghan O'Brien may, with his red-tinted glasses, may feel differently about it, but that fundamentally Sinn Féin should be, a populist party of the centre-right and therefore should coalesce in that direction. He says, that the issue that people might think of Sinn Féin as left-wing on housing hasn't gone away as an issue, but the new division in politics tends to find its voice on cultural issues. Many groups, such as the fuel protesters, are anti-establishment and opposed to green and liberal policies. It's interesting to think of the fuel protests as a cultural issue. About the most material issue that you could possibly see.
By the way, just on that does remind me of my favourite commentary about the fuel protests came from David W. Higgins, also in the Irish Independent, where, look, and I find the fuel protest, I find it interesting and just in general, and I do find both the class politics and the class composition of the whole movement. I think it's interesting, and we could talk all day about it, right? Yeah. And obviously there were arguments as to whether or not it was a left-wing protest or a right-wing protest, and there were arguments around the class composition of the protest. All this, right? And certainly, yes, you could see that there were, certain right-wing currents as part of that protest, yeah, which by and large, the organisers or some of the organisers tried to disavow a little bit, or even to the point where, Independent Ireland have kind of distanced themselves from even what they consider the far-right elements of the protest movement. David W. Higgins, in the Irish Independent, he took a different approach, where he said that he disagreed with blockading oil refineries and he disagreed with their methods. However, we should be able to admit that there are only two sexes. So he actually,
oh my God,
he disagreed.
It's like a pick and mix ideology.
The bit that he liked all of the noxious right-wing American culture war stuff.
If only they'd done it without putting tractors in front of an army.
David W. Higgins thought it was great because liberalism has gone too far.
Oh my God.
All right. So,
but sorry,
Tadhg, you also, I think, had some interesting things to say about the protest. Yeah, I think you were out of the country at the time. You were saying. But
I mean, I don't want to get loads of messages now going, "Oh, I hear you're right wing now, Tadhg." But I just felt like there was a lack of that moment for us on the left, or I'll speak for myself. I don't know what you guys are, to be honest. But as a tedious lefty, I just thought there was a lot of, there's a right-wing element, there's a racist element, and that may be true, and I'm sure that was true. But the effectiveness of the protest, I have to say, just on a pure envy level, I was like, well done, fair play. You've achieved all the things that certainly I wanted to achieve. And I'm not saying I'm a leader or anything, but being involved in the pro-Palestine movement over the last couple of years, you brought the government to their knees, you brought the country to an economic standstill, you got results. I think they made, was it $500 million available straight away. And I just thought, can we just, instead of kind of going, that's wrong, I'm not quite sure about that guy, which is something we'll probably get into, this kind of purification thing, I think that really dogs the left. Let's stand aside and go, what have they done that's effective? Maybe some of their methods are not methods that we would use. I don't know. I haven't investigated
maybe
enough.
Even some of their aims aren't
exactly
aims that we would endorse. But I had the envy about January 6th, I must say.
Absolutely.
Oh my God, they went into Congress.
It looked like great fun. Let's be honest.
Brilliant. My liberal family were appalled, but I was absolutely delighted.
That's what Nick Mullen said about it. He was looking at the videos, just going I should have been there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, Niamh, you in relation to the protest, you had sort of people in your family or extended family anyway involved too.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's different also, the kind of city versus country divide
absolutely,
in a way.
Because you own a truck doesn't make you bourgeois.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm from Clare and my family in Cork, and lots of people in my family were out in the protest with their tractors. Yeah. And that, I don't know that they would, if they were asked, are you right wing, are you left wing, they probably wouldn't even, categorise themselves in any which way, but just we have to go out and make a living. The situation is that right now we can't do that. And we are protesting that fact. And I kind of hate the way people try and categorise just normal people, try to put them into boxes. And, you know, there was so much kind of honing in the media on certain personalities that had, I don't know, court convictions, or there was something about a guy who apparently had some animal abuse case, or you know, that was kind of headline news for a day and a half. And it's like, that's a distraction. What's actually happening here is that there are hundreds, maybe thousands of people out protesting because they cannot make ends meet. And we should all get behind that, because we're all struggling in one way or another. We're all trying to pay bills. And I think, there's definitely a kind of those kind of backward, ignorant people down the country, you know, they're all racist and they're all whatever. And it's like, well, hold on a second. But even like I was in Dublin during the protests, and I went down to O'Connell Street a few times and walked along, and, you know, I didn't see anything that I thought, oh, that's, you know, that's
obviously
troublesome,
right wing or whatever.
Yeah, I didn't see anything like that. And I did see one sign that was something, you know, it was an anti-war sign, and it was joining the dots between, you know, if you could just oppose war, because like the root cause of all of this is the war.
So let's get back to this kind of question about the left. Tadhg raised this idea that at least some people on the left were kind of dismissing that out of hand. And it's that kind of attitude that Eoghan O'Malley, I think, is kind of identifying here, that Sinn Féin weren't particularly squeamish about the protests, but some leftists were. And this is kind of evidence that on various issues, the kind of Sinn Féin is more in touch with the centre-right than with the left. But Eoghan, you've been with Sinn Féin in a Dublin Central kind of left unity event relatively recently, I think, just last week or so, wasn't it? You know, we're coming up to the by-election, and we still have this idea that the left constitutes, for one thing, a potential alternative government, and certainly a kind of a voting bloc with mutual transfers in the likes of the Galway and Dublin by-elections. So what have you seen, and how does it fit with this argument about where Sinn Féin should or might position itself?
Like one thing about that event, and also related to Eoghan O'Malley's piece, that he did strip people before profit out of his analysis, in that he said that Sinn Féin, you know, to give the kind of drive-by on it, he said that, you know, Sinn Féin supported the fuel protests, the rest of the left didn't, ergo Sinn Féin is right-wing. But if you look at, like, people before profit were quite quick to support the protest. Paul Murphy went down, and Sunday Independent actually did polling on it, and PPP voters overwhelmingly supported the fuel protests. Now, the softer left didn't.
Yeah.
I've got to say, as a leftist myself, I'm old and I'm a leftist. But yeah, as a member of, you know, whatever you want to call it, the hard or far left myself, I like to see Sinn Féin, and I like to see people before profit there supporting this kind of a movement. I like to see as well, I know, like, people on the left, we have to have our analyses, and I liked to see the likes of PPP and the likes of the Irish Communist Party and the Communist Party of Ireland and CYM. I find their analyses more interesting that they found a way to support the protests. Now, equally, we had a great evening over in Teachers Club. It was all of the candidates for the Dublin Central by-election, and I moderated a wee discussion, and, you know, found it interesting. We kind of kicked things off with, you know, I do like to put labels on people a little bit, and I did ask them to, Joe, first question, what are your politics, you know? And
this was soft left included, basically.
Soft left included, yeah. So we had
Greens.
We had Janice Boylan from Sinn Féin, Ruth O'Dea from the Labour Party, Janet Horner from the Green Party, Owen O'Cianavan from PPP, and Daniel Ennis from the Soc Dems. And yeah, you know, like, Janice Boylan spoke about, she was quite definite. She's a Republican socialist. And I was like, yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah, she's great.
Like, I'm with that.
Really like her.
That's more broadly, I do think, you know, that's the politics that the left needs to meet this current moment. She also there were interesting moments throughout the discussion, particularly Eoghan O'Canavan from PBP. He said he was very definite and he wanted to push home this idea that the left needs to rule out coalition with with either a Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil. Other soft left parties are reluctant to make that promise, unfortunately, I would say. And there was another interesting moment. There were like moments of little bits and pieces of tension where, look, you think about the state of left politics and the state of the world. Like, to be honest, like I'm cool with having the Labour Party there as part of the left. I really, it's low on my list of priorities, as to whether or not the Labour Party should be part of, a coalition with us. I'm cool with them. And even if I maybe don't necessarily forgive them over the austerity government, it's like this is where we are, right?
Yeah. But it would be a small part of any left government in any case. Right?
But it was interesting to see some of the moments of tension. For example, Ruth O'Dea from the Labour Party, she at one point she spoke about, I did kind of give the caveat of, look, we don't want to get too American on this here, but the flag was brought up, and I had to ask her, what does the flag mean to you? And she was talking about, look, Dublin Central, which is, it is, not to sound like a real liberal here, but it is a very it is truly a diverse constituency in every sense, not just in terms that liberals would speak of, but also in terms of class composition, right? And obviously, Dublin Central has been seen of a lot of these, right-wing protests or right-wing flying of the flag. So people would bring a certain number of assumptions, I suppose, to a discussion about the flag as far as Dublin Central goes. And I did ask her, what does the flag mean to you? And she spoke in terms of, there was almost a certain kind of a nervousness about the flag and what it meant, whereas, which did cause Janice to come in and say, we've got to just fly the fucking thing. Now, she didn't use those words, but that's, that spirit, which, to be honest, would be my thing as well. I kind of think, don't get me wrong, I've been, I've been in certain parts of Dublin where, I have seen tricolours flying, and it does remind me of, I come, don't know what the right term for this is, but I come from a mixed family from the north, and, certain towns in the north, the flying of the Union Jack up there, right? It is a very much, I know it's just the flying of a flag. It's an exclusionary thing. Sure. And certainly there have been certain times where, and as far as any of this goes, I'm from the Janice Boylan school of just fly the fucking flag, right? But I have been in places where it's like, oh, this is being flown a certain way, right?
Yeah, and it's being flown a way that is directly inherited from the British exclusionary flying of the flag. That's the thing. I mean, it's imitating not only loyalists in the north, but it's imitating far right in Britain who fly that flag on that exclusionary basis.
I do think that the only way of answering that is to just fly it ourselves. I actually love seeing the tricolour when we go on Palestine marches. I think more of it. I
always try to ensure I do that. If I'm in a march, I'm carrying the Irish flag and the Palestine flag if I can, if I'm carrying any flag. But I think we just need to keep flying it as well. I mean, also, I think it would be an audacious thing for me to say, that's not your flag because I don't agree with all of your views. That's not for me to say at all. It reminds me of
Take it down from the map.
Exactly. Who am I It reminds me of I don't know if there's a Jack Charlton documentary, and I think Larry Mullen from U2 contributes to it, and his contribution is Jack Charlton put pride back in the flag, because the terrorists in the north basically defiled that flag, and Jack Charlton, obviously being an English lad and most of the team composed of Scottish and English people, put pride back in our tricolour. And I just thought that was ridiculous, and it would be ridiculous for any Irish person to say, this is my flag under my terms, because it means different things for different people. So I wouldn't cower and say, people over there, they've started flying the flag, so now I don't fly the flag, we just fly it in our own kind of lefty way.
Yes, on the same pole as a Palestine and Cuban.
A little bit more dainty.
Yeah.
You know, Jack Charlton, one of my favourite things about the Jack Charlton era, and this came out when an English journalist, it was in the kind of early enough days of his tenure, and an English journalist was writing a story on him, like, going, oh, like, isn't it amazing Jack Charlton is managing Ireland now, and they're on the way to some match, and Jack kind of tried to, like, say, oh, like, that's just a tape I put on, the guys seem to like it, but he made headlines over in Britain because he was playing Sean South from Gary Oldman.
Yeah.
This became, like, quite controversial.
That's ringing
like,
a bell,
The Wolf Tones on the bus.
Yeah.
Yes, the team bus.
Andy
sure.
Townsend going mental and stuff.
Yes. Now, just to put on record, I'm a big Jack Charlton fan. I don't want to denigrate him in any way by being English, but I just thought it was amusing. They're playing English sports, an English manager, mostly English and Scottish players, and that was the thing. That reclaimed our proud tricolour for Larry Mullen.
Well, let's talk about the Palestinian flag now, because Tadhg, you are very well known, obviously, for your advocacy for Palestine. You're wearing it literally today in studio. For those of you who are listening, Tadhg is wearing a Free Palestine Boycott Israel shirt, and you were on a flotilla last year, and there is now a flotilla on its way. There have been some arrests. You, of course, were arrested last year. How do you see how it's going at the moment, and the way that this flotilla perhaps has been greeted by a certain amount of maybe additional tension in the kind of solidarity community?
Yeah, like, I suppose we all have, I say we all, anybody who's involved in the movement has got ideas of what the best thing to do going forward is to advocate for Palestine right now. A lot of people feel like BDS should be amplified, that BDS is where it's at. A lot of people feel there are other things we could do other than flotillas. But I have mixed feelings, I have to say. I felt like going again so soon, if I was in control of it, I probably wouldn't have. Mostly because I felt that they were always going to be under pressure because of the level of censorship that we're under, which I know we'll touch on. Like, people getting that message out is such a big part of the flotilla. So the boats are part of it, but then people raising awareness, even though I know it's a completely churned out phrase, but I mean, we didn't, for instance, break the siege in October, but it did feel like we won some sort of PR war where it was kind of global news and there was people talking about Palestine. I mean, the metric I would use is when I came home from the flotilla, there was lads coming up to me in Cork who'd never spoken to me about Palestine before, saying, oh my God, it's awful what they did to you. Like, is that the way they are, kind of thing? And again, in that moment, I wouldn't be like, have you listened to anything I've been trying to say to you forever? Have you read Ilan Pape, whatever? You just kind of go, great, like, whatever it is that gets the message through is a win. So I think, I mean, if you're not going to break the siege, I mean, everyone goes to try and break the siege, of course, but you're obviously cognizant that that's probably objectively unlikely, then you got to win the PR battle. So that's why I felt this time round they were going to be under pressure with what's going on in the world, with Iran, obviously, and the ongoing kind of frozen conflict there, with the fact that I think Israel is at a moment where it's very likely to carry out false flags. I mean, it's at that moment I feel like we would be sitting ducks for that kind of stuff. So there were mixed feelings about the guys going. Now what has happened is that Saif and Tiago, who are two of the leaders of the movement, have been kidnapped. And, like, I just did a video about it the other day. So, like, we were kidnapped. And I mean, it is kidnapping. I know it sounds a little bit, it's something that, like, the likes of Piers Morgan is going to push back on. But I mean, I am interested in international law. In accordance with international law, they have no right to raid your boat and take you to Israel when you had no intention of going to Israel, like we were trying to go to Gaza. So it's a kidnapping. We were like 50 nautical miles outside Gaza when it happened to us. The guys were like in Greek waters, so like 1,000 plus nautical miles. That's an escalation, and abducting the two lads and bringing them to Israel. And I feel what's happening now is they're going to try and see what kind of furore is going to be built up to try and get the guys out. If it isn't substantial, this is the way Israel operates. I feel they just try and do really dastardly shit, and they see how much pushback they get. And they've gotten away with so much in the last 2.5 years. I'd be concerned about the guy's safety. But the point I'm coming to is the brutality with which they have received this flotilla, beating the shit out of the other participants, like kidnapping the lads and trying to put some bogus charges on them for connections to terrorism, which is everyone who pushes back against Israel at all under any circumstances is a terrorist. I mean, Miss Rachel is a terrorist, I'm a terrorist, you guys are all terrorists. That has surprised me because they're being so brutal, it's now making it a story. So now everyone is actually talking about it. Had they not acted with this level of brutality, had they not abducted people 1,000 miles, nautical miles from Gaza, it wouldn't have been a story. And this is the thing with Israel that blows my mind, and it's evidence that it's a ideology, and the US-Israel axis is an empire on its last legs because it only knows escalation. When we were in prison, for instance, we'd say, can you just get us some medical attention to the 75-year-old man who needs his medicine or he's going to die? And they go, we don't have any doctors for animals. Like, even when we were trying to be reasonable, they know nothing but escalation. They know nothing but more violence and more, and it's just worse and worse and worse. Whereas if they were tactical about it, they could have made this a non-story. Actually, I think if they were tactical about October 7th, they could have just continued to expand and take more land very slowly, and they were doing a great job of it. Whereas their brutality has raised the Palestine question all around the world now in a way that it wasn't, and I feel that's where they always come unstuck, I think, because they just know only violence and escalation, I think.
Maybe just on being tactical, but not in relation to Israel, but maybe in relation to the flotilla organising itself. There was, at one point, I was kind of part of discussions. I was never going to go, but I was in discussions with people who were considering it. And one of the questions that came up was that they would, instead of trying to get to Gaza and break the siege, that they would use the boats to somehow form a blockade.
Yeah.
That maybe they would blockade if there was an arms shipment that was transiting through the Mediterranean to get to Israel, or kind of at the Strait of Gibraltar, or other kind of strategic points in the Mediterranean, that the boats would have come together and blockaded an arms shipment, for example, to do something differently, but that would also impact Israel's capacity to perpetrate a genocide. I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Personally, I would have supported that, right? So there's lots of different flotilla organisations, and sometimes they coalesce and then sometimes they don't. The Global Smooth Flotilla is by far the highest profile one now, and it's got like the biggest Instagram page, right?
Yeah.
Just to be vulgar about it, because unfortunately this is the kind of thing it comes down to. The way that organisation is structured right now, and again, I'm not part of the steering committee or anything like that, but it doesn't seem like it's a little bit top down, and there's like a few people who make decisions at the top, and they're open to feedback and whatnot. But if I was to structure it, it would be horizontal, and it would be like, okay, what do we all feel is the best way to move forward here? And you'd mostly be consulting with Palestinian groups on the ground, which, to be fair, the Global Smooth Flotilla are, but it is still very much, there's a steering committee, and they have made this kind of decision, and they were like, go again, go again, go again. Personally, I wouldn't have done that. But there's also a thing with the flotilla-ism, right, which is that, and I have such mixed feelings on this, like, you need celebrities to give it a bit of a lift off, but then people grow tired of seeing celebrities talking about boats, and they may not even be on boats, and it gives the enemy the opportunity to traduce the whole thing and say, well, this is just like a selfie yacht or whatnot. But then you need the celebs to give it lift off. You know what I mean? So there's always that tension there, I think ordinary people doing ordinary things is the way to go, actually. And then there's also the thing of like people going on the boat and maybe, losing the run of themselves because there's more attention on them. Like I have sympathy for anybody who suddenly people are like treating as a kind of a savior, and you've got like lots of followers on Instagram, and the easiest thing in the world to do is go, oh, the only reason he did any of that is because he's trying to get into politics, or he's trying to become famous, or he's, and you're kind of feeding into the Israeli narrative directly then, which is like whether you were squeaky clean and you were the most like positive, no interest in celebrity type of person whatsoever, they would still make up stuff about you. Like, I mean, I had the experience of being on a boat and making a video of the amount of aid that we had on this particular boat with Greta Thunberg, like, who just happens to be the most famous person in the world, and she put it out on her account, and it went super viral. And it's like I was doing a spoof of, look at all the aid we have, and look at all like these bloodthirsty group of terrorists, and it was like people playing drafts and cooking and kind of hugging each other and stuff. And still the Israelis, when they came on, made a video of the same boat where they'd gotten rid of all the aid, they'd put in like mojito making machines. And now recently in the latest one, they have like condoms and like drugs. So I feel like we're kind of, without getting too philosophical about it, I feel we're in a kind of a post kind of evidence world anyway. Like, it doesn't really matter. The Israelis are always going to say, these guys are just on a jolly, couldn't they have done this, couldn't they have done that? So that's a long-winded way of saying I would have done exactly as you say, but unfortunately the structures at the moment in the biggest group, the decisions were made over my head and over everyone's head. Yeah. And I think going forward now, I wonder what they'll do to re-strategize. But again, I actually didn't see this coming. I didn't see them abducting Saif. I didn't see them abducting Tadhg. Saif was on what was called an observer boat. So he was never going to go to Gaza. You guys probably know Caoimhe Butterly and other Irish activists who would be part of an observer boat. Like, they're usually, again, if you adhere to any sort of law, you don't touch the observer boat. Now he is being abducted. He's of Palestinian heritage, and his young family are absolutely terrified as to what he's going to... I mean, who knows what they're going to do to him, really. So I just would urge people to advocate for the release of those prisoners, but as importantly, or probably more importantly, the release of all the Palestinian prisoners, many of whom are children in Israel right now that have things hanging over their head like a potential literal death sentence.
You talk about the post-evidence world and a kind of a situation where what we used to call evidence is now content.
Yeah.
So you made your content, the
Exactly.
the Israelis made their content.
Exactly,
You know, and in the court of Instagram, of course. But you are a little bit like what we were talking about earlier with the Palestine Action case. You've been suppressed in the court of Instagram.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. Let's pivot to talking about this kind of censorship. And you've mentioned it a couple of times already, but you've been really directly on the receiving end of that.
Yeah, I mean, like, the biggest censorship, I suppose, is that I'm banned from Instagram forever. Like, and I mean forever is like, if I start a new account, it gets taken down straight away. So it's an unusual list that I'm on, like particularly naughty boy type territory. So that was a new one on me. And then I've had like YouTube demonetized and various kind of accounts taken down and whatnot. But censorship, it's a funny one for me, right? So I was thinking about it when we spoke on the phone. There's types of self-censorship that I've done to myself, right? So there's a type of cancellation that I've experienced willingly. So for instance, I and people I was working with at the time, we had a sitcom on RT years ago, and they were just like unbelievably unprofessional and horrible to deal with. And as soon as I could bitch and moan about them, I did. And then we were trying to get a second season off the ground, and we had a well-known video to demand people who wanted to take it on, but RT just stopped replying to our emails. And I was just like, could you just let me know, like, either way, like, I've kind of got to book people and like there's a school and stuff, and they just never replied. So any opportunity I got, then I was like, you know, these guys are shit, I hate these guys. So you have to take responsibility for, I think I've cancelled myself in some areas. The kind of censorship that bugs me, I suppose, is being cancelled from within a little bit, like within the lefty movement or circles. So for instance, because I have been to Iran, and that's what I'm guilty of. Like, I've never said that I'm a supporter of the Iranian government. I've never made any work. I've never done any propaganda like tours or whatever. I'd love it because I'm skint. Like, I'd love to reach out to them publicly now, for any of the authoritarian regimes to give me a bell. But within the left circles, I think, particularly in the pro-Palestine movement, I'm kind of cancelled. You know, I'd be loathsome to compare myself to George Galloway. But like, I think it's amusing that, for instance, in Britain, George Galloway is banned from speaking at the big Palestine marches. And the man, whatever you think about him, whatever you think about his views across all sorts of issues, the man has been really eloquently speaking about the Palestinian cause his whole career. And like, there's people who know him in that region and they don't know any other British or Irish politician, maybe with the exception of Claire Daly or Richard Boyd Barrett as well. To be fair, I always get a buzz when I'm in that region. They know Claire and Richard Boyd Barrett. So I feel like there's an issue there where it's kind of hurtful in a way, and it's really disappointing, and it's the stuff that we're talking about. There's a real problem with growing a movement when we continue to kind of cancel each other so much, I think, on the left.
Do those kind of rejections contribute then to the ability of the likes of Instagram, of Meta, the company that owns it, to shut you down because you won't have that kind of support from the kind of respectable left?
I think so. What Owen's describing as the soft left, or the kind of the liberal embrace, if you don't have that, you're absolutely doomed, like, in terms of getting your account back on. I feel like if I was softer and if I was more like, let's advocate for Palestine, but let's be a little bit more quiet in terms of being angry with Israel about the whole thing, I feel I probably would have already had my account back. But yeah, I've got mixed feelings about the whole censorship thing, because I'm not like bitching and moaning about it. I know what I'm getting myself into. Every time I go on the internet and say something, I know what's likely to happen. As we were saying on the phone, I'm probably the only comedian, I think, in Ireland that has daily feedback from the likes of John McGurk, for instance, about how unfunny he feels that I am. And that's very funny to me, I have to say. There's a whole host of Irish Times writers who I know for sure don't like my comedy. So I am getting... there's an instant feedback loop, I think, from the Irish establishment that they don't support me in any way. But again, there's a lack of balls, I think, as well, on the left to kind of go, oh, this guy's been to Iran, has he? Oh, shit. Like, I just want to advocate for Palestine without having anything to do with the resistance or where it gets its funds from. I mean, either you're an anti-imperialist or you're not. And I think if you are, then you need to go with your solidarity for the anti-imperialist movements, even if it hurts a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I think what's been revealed over the last couple of years is people can offer the solidarity until it affects them directly, and then they'll let you go and be cancelled, I think.
And just on the Iran stuff, so the kind of cancelling started when you went to Iran, but has it changed at all since the war on Iran, or has there been any kind of rolling back?
I think it is changing, yeah. It's funny, like, I mean, I never thought I'd live to see the day that Iran is kind of sexy. Like, in the online world, Iran, like, they're coming out with all these Lego... I was talking to the guys yesterday, actually, who are making these Lego movies just on Twitter. Look, the other thing as well is that, I mean, I don't feel like Iran is a perfect country, or the government has... I mean, I think it is a repressive government at times. But again, it's like you were saying earlier about joining the dots. Unless you join the dots of maybe, why is this a repressive country? Mm-hmm. Why has it been tough, like, to say the least, on its own citizens at times? Well, it is connected again to US imperialism, and it's connected to what happens when the place is crawling with Mossad. Like, I was doing an interview when I was in Iran in a studio, and I said to the host when we were on a TV break, just kind of messing really, like, is there a lot of Mossad around or whatever? And he was just like, oh, the Mossad are in this building. So that's how crawling with CIA, and because this is the country that we know that the US empire is absolutely determined to take down. Netanyahu's wet dream, like, is to destroy Iran. Yeah. So you've got to be a little bit tough when you're that, you're that much in the firing line. But to answer your question, yeah, absolutely. There's something changing, I think, in the general, the way in which Iran has conducted itself, I think, in the narrative war is by far the biggest win they've had, in my opinion. Like, everyone's talking about the Strait of Hormuz, but I feel like in about 50 or 60 days, they've undone decades of propaganda against the country. Like, on one particular level, we were supposed to believe that Iran was a backward country. And now we can all see every day when we turn on our phones just these endless procession of buffoons in the Trump administration making fools out of themselves and their country, talking about war, connecting it to gaming. Like, every single... I don't know about you guys, but every time I see something from the official White House account at the moment, I think, is that the official White House account? It just can't be. And they're up against, like, these masters of diplomacy who, like, have PhDs and can't. And now the whole world is going, oh, shit, like, what else are they been lying to us about? So I'm really happy about that, because, again, to touch back on what we were saying earlier, if Iran is a regime, then the US is a regime. Britain is a regime. We're all regimes or we're not regimes, because you must be kidding to try and convince anyone after 2.5+ years of genocide that any of the countries who contributed to that are morally above Iran. Like, you must be having a laugh. Like, and if so, let's prove it.
Yeah, as you were talking about on the phone as well, to globalize the Intifada, the idea that phrase would become illegal in Britain.
Yeah.
Which regime are we talking about?
Exactly,
now? Yeah.
Exactly. But I just think that's hysterical, though, that people on the right in Britain who would be, if somebody is a free speech absolutist and he's like, I want to have the right to say anything, however obnoxious, I want to have the right to say it. I respect that guy as long as he doesn't then say, oh my God, I absolutely support Keir Starmer, though, in completely banning red triangles and globalise the Intifada. You know what I mean? It's like, are there rules or are there not? And that's where I think Britain and its fidelity to Israel in this moment it's falling apart as a state, and obviously this government is, because people see that tension there. Like, they see there's just no way that you can tell me that these kids are terrorists and that anybody who holds that sign is a terrorist, and you can't say that phrase anymore. But this is a completely open and free democracy. It just can't. They can't be both. You have conservative politicians at the moment, I'm sure you saw over the weekend, speaking straight face to camera saying we need to ban the Palestine marches, but Tommy Robbins's Unite the
Yeah,
Kingdom
saw
march
that.
is fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
saw that.
come on, like we're now in farce. Like satire is over.
I saw somebody pointing out that actually while the Palestine marches were big and frequent, there weren't these kind of anti-Semitic incidents going on. It's actually been, since this
Exactly.
movement has been kind of chased off the street.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's police reports into that. But look, we could do a whole other episode on how just infuriating it is that Britain is trying to convince the public at the moment that there is, just on a basic logic level, I did philosophy in college, right? And it always comes back to like just bald logic, right? So the marches are connecting to the rise in anti-Semitism. That's what they're claiming. That's what the establishment is claiming. But there's no connection at all to the war crimes Israel's carrying out that the marches are protesting against. Do you know what I mean? Like either it is or it isn't. It's just there's a total dishonesty there. But I think people are waking up, thankfully.
Sorry, go on, Niamh.
No, I was just going to ask a bit more about, just going back to what you said earlier about you're not allowed you're censored now from Instagram. And I suppose a lot of kind of the content that you were putting out was going out through Instagram or going out through Twitter or X or whatever. And I suppose just about the process of making the content. So you're making content about one of the most horrific, incidents, genocide that we're seeing unfolding before our eyes on our screens. So the most horrific content you can imagine, but then the use of kind of comedy to get that message out. I remember sharing your videos very early on with people who didn't really get it, going, this guy will explain it to you. He kind of breaks it down in a way that you can kind of relate to, and it's more light-hearted entry point to something that's incredibly dark. So I suppose I wonder about the process of making that content and now what's coming next for you if the censorship means that you can't really get it out there before as you used to.
Yeah, so in terms of making the content, it wasn't like, I didn't sit down and say, I'm going to make this type of work now because I feel like that's what I can do in a genocide. It was more a kind of a combination of the fact that this was the type of comedy that I was always interested in. I love allegory. I'd made sketches about, like, for instance, loyalism and trying to depict loyalism as a house share situation in Cork. And some of those sketches had gone viral because, as you say, it just makes like a supposedly difficult situation really easy to understand. And that's the whole point. Like, that's satire at its best for me. It just it exposes power and power structures, and it speaks to power, but it also, as you say, like, just makes the ordinary person go, okay. And like the most satisfying thing I've ever got is talking to someone at a march and they say, oh, my dad didn't know or care about Israel-Palestine, but he saw one of your sketches with the guy getting stung, the bee sting, and he was like, oh yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense, that's totally unfair. Like, that's literally the most satisfying thing that you could possibly say to me. But it was just like, I do this kind of comedy, and we're now in a moment where, there's a lot of propaganda, we're being hit heavy, and Palestinian friends, particularly in Ireland, because in the first 2 weeks of the genocide, I was just in shock, because I suppose after October 7th, you kind of knew what was coming. I had a decent understanding of the conflict before October 7th, and I just thought, like, what on earth is coming? Like, the response is going to be... And so I was a bit shocked, and I already had Palestinian friends in Cork, good friends, but then they said, like, man, you need to get in here, because we're saying this endlessly and nobody's listening to us, but if a white lad is doing sketches about it, you look like you could be American or English, like, that'll be powerful. That just blew my mind, and he's so right. It's still today, like, they might listen to me, like, but they won't listen to somebody who might have had family members killed by Israel. I mean, that say everything about the kind of racism that we all kind of have. But so yeah, it was mostly just like, I'll apply my skill set to the situation, and here we go. I never planned, I'm going to get loads of new followers. I mean, how could you plan to be advocating for Palestine in any way, shape or form and say, this is going to make my career? So I knew my day in the sun was limited, like, and as the censorship was kicking in, I was thinking, okay, what am I going to do now? And then other things have opened up. Upscroll, big shout out to Upscroll. Anybody who's creating new platforms, I think power to them. And I've gone through a bit of a journey. So initially when the page went, I was just like, I got my message out there. I've been taken down now. And it's a big, like, I don't have any commercial work. All my voiceover, I used to do a lot of voiceover work since I was being very vocal about Palestine. Mysteriously, I used to get emails like regularly from October, November 2023 on saying, hi Tadhg, we're just going in a different direction now. So like all the commercials are going in a different direction, but none of them are going towards me. So it can be a bit scary because I have a Patreon account, and that's a way for me to kind of have a relationship with fans and followers that they can subscribe for extra content. I had 500,000 followers on Instagram, so like that's 500,000 potential patrons gone straight away. But I have come out the other side of licking my wounds and saying, okay, well, what do we do then? And this is a problem in the left, I think, generally, but certainly for content creators. How do we fight back against the censorship? And I feel one of the answers, part of the solution is to organise each other so that we're not taken down. Whenever I was doing stuff individually, and again, when I was saying if people are kind of going, oh, well, that's a real crazy lefty, let him off, then it's very easy for them to take down your account and you're done. But when you organise, so I've kind of gone in under a group now where there's a studio in London and there's a few of us making content in there, and the Canary are kind of part of that ecosystem. Double Down News and stuff, and I'm kind of collaborating with one or two of those guys to kind of offer the satirical or the comedy wing of all those projects, because I feel like they kind of can't take us all down. So I'm trying to get in under the umbrella of general anti-imperialist media, I suppose, in order to try and not just protect myself, but also I really am passionate about bringing the next generation of young satirists into this world, and it's really hard to attract them if you say, you're going to get into this world, it's going to be brilliant, like you're going to meet lots of great people and there's going to be lots of great like table quizzes and stuff, but like you're going to be instantly cancelled, your Instagram account's going to be taken out, and you won't be able to make your rent. Like we won't be able to kind of grow, I think, unless we're able to build some of the infrastructure. So I know lots of like unbelievably talented people who are in this world right now, and they're pretty much to a man and woman unemployed and kind of unemployable. So there's an opportunity there for people, I think, to try and build some infrastructure around them, and I just want to play my little role in kind of doing that, I think.
Well, I think the Ditch is trying to play a role in doing that as well, and
absolutely,
the comedy wing of the Ditch, Tadhg, there's an opening there for sure.
Yeah, I think we're already doing it, but I just want people to see all of this stuff more to make them believe, okay, there is a way, because it's very hard for particularly like a young guy from a working class background, which is where I'm from myself, to say, come into this world. But like you need to pay your rent, like you need to eat and stuff, so we don't all have to be, completely and utterly in abject poverty to advocate for a better, fairer world,
Yeah, material solidarity. Yeah,
exactly,
sure.
yeah.
I think we're going to have to call it a podcast there. This has already gone a record length, but it's
absolutely
brilliant, Tadhg. It's been really great to have you on.
Thanks, guys. Pleasure.
Thanks a million, Tadhg, for coming in, and thanks, Eoghan, for coming in to tell us about the Ditch.
Thanks, guys.
If you want to shout down the party line, and I'd say you might after this episode, theditchpartyline at gmail.com. Keep up with the Ditch on WhatsApp, on theditch.com. Support us. We've just been talking about material solidarity. Give a little to the Ditch.
Exactly, yeah. Support the Ditch,
donate,
guys.
Subscribe, go for it.
Yeah, that's it.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a million.
Bye, thanks.
Bye.